I think it's important to talk about the last paragraph of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 28, because in it Matthew pulls together the major emphases that we've seen working throughout this Gospel. In chapter 28, the women come to the tomb on the first day of the week. In Mark's Gospel, you'll recall that what they discover is that the stone has been rolled away, and the women peer inside and they see a young man who tells them that Jesus has been resurrected. When they come to the tomb in Matthew's Gospel, the stone has not been rolled away. Indeed, it has been sealed, as we learn at the end of chapter 27, by Pilate, and a guard has been set there. In chapter 28, there is an earthquake. An angel descends, rolls away the stone, and invites the women to peer inside. The soldiers become as dead men as a result of this earthquake and the angelic appearance. The women look inside. The angel tells them that Jesus has been raised. He tells them to go and tell the disciples about the resurrection and that he will meet them in Galilee. The women do as they are told, unlike in the Gospel of Mark. They encounter the risen Jesus on their way to tell the disciples, who reiterates the angel's demand. And then in this last paragraph, we see that Jesus meets the disciples in Galilee. He does so on a mountain. And so this final scene is reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount that begins in chapter 5 in the early part of the Gospel, about which Bart Ehrman has talked so much. So once again, Jesus is being presented as the new Moses. Indeed, this is reminiscent of the final appearance of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Pentateuch of the Old Testament, where Moses is on a mountain himself, on Mount Pisgah. He is on Mount Pisgah and he looks over into the promised land, and he gives the Hebrews final commandments before they enter into Canaan, where they establish Israel, having come out of bondage in Egypt. And so this is then how Matthew concludes the Gospel. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Jesus is the new Moses. He is the authoritative interpreter of God's will. He supersedes the Pharisees. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him. And then he gives this commission, this command to the disciples. "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." The word nations there is Gentiles. And so the disciples that are to be included in this new Israel, this new community that Jesus is calling out, are not simply Jews, but non-Jews, Gentiles as well. They are to be disciples, followers of the new Moses' teaching. Jesus says, "Baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." Baptism is replacing circumcision as the entry rite into this new community, this new congregation, this new Israel. Once baptized, Jews and Gentiles are to obey everything that Jesus has commanded. How are they to know what Jesus has commanded, what they are to obey? Well, you flip back to the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew itself becomes a compendium of Jesus' teaching, of Jesus' commandments, of learning about what it is that Jesus expects, how it is one is to obey the words of Jesus. That is the means by which one learns about Jesus and becomes a disciple of Jesus, so that Jesus can say, "Remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." Insofar as Matthew's church initiates new members, both Jews and Gentiles, into the new Israel, by focusing upon the teaching of Jesus, the commandments of Jesus, as embedded within the gospel, Jesus is present to them until the end of the age. This is the way in which Matthew pulls together all of the themes of the gospel, summarizes and emphasizes themes that we have found from the very beginning. And it is the way in which this gospel achieves its distinctive character. It is so different from what we find at the ending of Mark's gospel, and quite different from what we'll see tomorrow when we have an opportunity to look at Luke's gospel.